Ma'am?
Take it away.
Take it away. Okay.
You can start now.
Okay, go.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ma'am.
I am Teacher Anne,
I am Teacher L. And I am Teacher Jan.
and
we are the first reporters.
But before we are going to start our discussion, may we call on Miss Hongko Edeline Rim to lead the prayer.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So let's start our prayer. Let's bow down on our head and feel the presence of Lord, and we say, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Lord God, thank you sa mga blessings nga imong gihatag sa mua. Thank you sa adlaw nga imong gihatag sa mua, sa kinabuhi nga imong gipahulam sa mua. Lord, unta imo kami tagaan og maayong panghuna-huna para maka-learn kami karon nga adlaw sa ilahang report ni Mang Jailo. Unta na kami matun-an sa ila. Og Lord God, ipalayo kami sa mga tentasyon, pagsulay ikaw maga-bless sa amon sa matag adlaw, og ikaw pod maga-bless sa among teacher na untay palayo sa mga pagsulay. In Jesus' name we pray, Amen. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Amen.
Amen.
So, I will be the one to discuss first, and I will discuss the nature of learning. But before that, let me ask you a question. What is learning? What is meant by learning? For you, Ma'am L, what comes into your mind when you hear the word learning?
For me, learning is the process of acquiring knowledge in different ways.
How about you, Ma'am Jai?
Learning is all about learning continuous in our daily life and experiences.
Yes. You both have a point. So according to some authors, learning is a process that brings together personal and environmental experiences and influences for acquiring, enriching, or modifying one's knowledge, skills, values, attitudes, behavior, and worldviews. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior, including both observable activity and internal processes such as thinking, attitudes, and emotions. It is a relatively permanent influence on behavior, knowledge, and thinking skills that comes about through experience. Next slide.
Kung lalo kuno ko ano ta?
Lalo.
Oo, lalo. Kuan.
Next slide. Learning occurs when experience causes a relatively permanent change in an individual's knowledge, behavior, or potential for behavior. Learning is a long-term change in mental representations or associations as a result of experience. So therefore, learning is any change in the behavior of the learner. It is brought about by experience or by interaction of the person with the environment. It could be sa balay, sa eskwelahan, sa simbahan, or sa workplace. Bisag asa, naatay mga new learnings and discoveries. Every day we learn something, we discover something, and that learnings and discoveries change our behavior and the way we see the world. Tungod sa ato ang mga nakatunan sa palibot, nabago ato ang mga kinaiya, mindset, pangunahuna ug pananaw sa kinabuhi. Because learning is brought about by experience. Do you agree that through life experiences, we've learned something? Have you heard the famous quote, "Experience is the best teacher"? Nganong makasulti man ta nga our experience is the best teacher? How about you, Miss Lagarde? Ma'am Lagarde, are you there?
What was that, Ma'am Annalisa?
How can you justify that experience is the best teacher?
I can justify that experience is the best teacher because for me, when I experience a new thing or something, not just me, but we learn or develop a new skill from it. And when we experience, the more we understand the situation. Like, Anne, like for example, I was a caregiving student in my senior high school. And of course, we always discuss about helping people who are in need and demonstrating the right thing to do. So, for us to enable to understand the situation, our teacher lets us demonstrate individually. And that's how I can justify that experience is the best teacher. Basta kung maka-experience ta, mas masabtan man gud nato siya. That's all, Ma'am Annalisa.
Thank you so much, Miss Lagarde. So, according to Miss Lagarde, pag na siya experience, mas masabtan niya ang mga gipabuhat sa teacher. So, ilang teacher gipa-demonstrate sila individually para mas makasabot sila kung unsa ang task and makakuan sila, maka-generate sila og mga thoughts, mas ma-experience sila og mas ma-enhance nila ang ilahang skills sa ilahang strand nga caregiving. So nganong best teacher's experience? Best teacher's experience kay siya ang naghatag sa ato og mga lessons in life or learnings in life. Tungod ni experience, daghan tag nakatunan sa ato ang palibot. Like for example, a 5-year-old kid. Gibunalan siya kay nilaag siya nga wala na nangit sa iyang parents. Unya tagbaw nagpangita iyang ginikanan sa iyaha. From this, we can see that the 5-year-old kid that was being scolded by his parents learned his lessons. Tungod sa iyang experience, which is ang dili pagpanangit sa iyang ginikanan nga mulaag, allow him to change his behavior, nga next time pag mulaag siya, dapat mananghid para dili siya mabunalan. Muna siya ang power sa experience nato. It enables us to change our behavior. Because learning is brought about by experience and it comes along with change in behavior, values, and worldviews. The knowledge and learnings that we get from our experience, mao nay hinungdan nganong naay change sa tuang behavior, sa tuang panghunahuna ug sa tuang mga beliefs and values in life. Because when you start learning, the L becomes silent. Why? Because when you are learning, you are earning. And what are those earnings? You earn knowledge, attitude, values in life, and it can change the way you perceive things. Nganong importante man ang learning? For you, Ma'am Tukero, nganong makasulti ta nga importante ang learning?
For me, Ma'am Annalisa, makaingon jud ta nga importante ang learning because it teaches us kung unsa ang dapat buhaton, unsay angay isulti sa kung naamay galing angay nga naon. Ang learning manggod, very important na siya kay muunay magdala sa ato in a better and brighter future. Wala na siya, ma'am.
Thank you, Miss Tukero. So, importante ang learnings because it helps us in improving and enhancing our skills, knowledge, and abilities, and values. Next slide. So, the definition of learning covers the following elements. Learning is a long-term change. What do you mean by long-term change? It means na ang learning pangmatagalan siya. Though it does not last forever, kay wala may forever, pero ang learning pangmatagalan gyud siya. Dili siya for short-term change. Next is learning and change is brought about by experience. So, just like what I've said earlier, kaning mga learnings nato, it is brought about by ito ang mga experiences sa life. It does not include changes that are physiological. It means that learning is not related to any physical changes, just like maturation, mental illness, fatigue, hunger, or the like. So, it is not related to any physical changes sa tuang mga body. Because learning involves mental representation or association. Therefore, learning is an internal processes. So, it's bases in our brain. So, internal siya. Like for example, sa tuang thinking, the way we reason out, we analyze things. So, it is an internal processes. Gets ra? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am.
Okay. Okay, now let's proceed to the types of learning. There are types of learning resulting from engagement or participation in classroom activities. These types of learning are basic ingredients to success in school. These are what schools desire of students to develop. Next slide. The first one is motor learning. Motor learning is a form of learning for one to maintain and go through daily life activities as for example, walking, running, driving, climbing, and the like. These activities involve motor coordination. So, what do you mean by motor learning? So, motor learning are used every day throughout our lives. They help us move and do everything from lifting heavy items to typing on a keyboard. Motor coordination is the ability to coordinate muscle activation in a system that process posture. So kaning motor learning, muna siya itong ginabuhat everyday sa tuang life. Like for example, maglakaw ta sa dalan, magmudalagan ta, mag-drive ta, and climbing and the like. So it involves motor coordination sa tuang body. Like for example, a child learning how to walk. So the child is being able to acquire motor learning kay nagwalk siya, nakabalo siya unsaon paglakaw. Ang sipon. Next. Next is verbal learning. Verbal learning involves the use of spoken language as well as the communication devices used. So verbal learning from the word verbal itself, so it is a spoken language. An example of this is kanang mga signs, pictures, symbols, words, figures, sounds are tools used in such activities. For example, kanang bata, tuluan nimo og unsaon pag-identify sa mga figures. Like for example, kanang sa alphabet, tudluan nimo ang bata unsaon pag-identify nga ang A is for apple, ang B is for boy, ang C for chicken, D for drum, and so on. So, mo ni siya diri na mosulod ang verbal learning. The ability to read or to identify things or mga figures or mga words. Tesa, kung sipon. Next one is concept learning. Concept learning is a form of learning which requires the use of higher order mental processes like thinking, reasoning, and analyzing. It involves two processes, abstraction and generalization. So, kaning verbal learning, di ba, tudluan nimo og basa ang bata. Dili sa verbal learning, the child, magbasa ra gyud siya without understanding the context or the concept sa iyang gibasa. But diri sa concept learning, the child was able to attain kung unsa ang iyang gibasa. He was able to learn or to understand what he is reading. Because concept learning is a process by which experience allows us to partition objects in the world into classes. So muni siya kanang kuan siya ba kanang masabtan gyud nimo kung unsa imong gibasa, kay maka-attain ka og concept o maka-formulate ka og concept diri sa concept learning. Sabtan ra? Guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So diri sa concept learning, masabtan sa bata unsa iyang gibasa because the child was able to think, reason out, and analyze and reflect sa iyang gibasa. Next one is discrimination learning. Discrimination learning is a learning to differentiate between stimuli and responding appropriately to this stimuli. An example is being able to distinguish the sound of horns of different vehicles like bus, car, and ambulance. So, diri sa discrimination learning, diri nato ma-distinguish ba, ma-differentiate nato ang mga sounds. Like for example, mga sounds sa bus, sa car, and sa ambulance. For example, kanang sound sa iro, maka-differentiate ta, ay makaingon ta nga, iro na siya, kay ang iyahang sound niya, aw, aw. Ang maka-differentiate po ta nga, iring na siya, kay iyahang sound, meow, meow. So, diri, we can, respond appropriately to this stimuli. Like for example po, makabalo ta nga naisunog tungod sa tingog sa fire alarm. Makabalo ta nga, ay sunog ni siya, kay nang tingog ang fire alarm, na sunog, di ma-alert dayon ta. And another example is kanang sa ambulance. Makabaluta nga na ay i-admit sa Dumaguete. Kuan sila kanang na ay 50-50 dito gi-admit kay tungod sa tingog sa ambulance. Mo ni siya discrimination learning, being able to differentiate between stimuli and responding appropriately to this stimuli. So maka-differentiate ta sa mga butang ato ang mga nadungog. Next slide. Next is learning of principles. It is learning principles related to science, mathematics, grammar, and the like. Principles show the relationship between two or more concepts, some examples of which are formulas, laws, associations, relations, and the like. So there is a learning of principles. Sa learning of principles, it provides additional insight into what makes people learn more effectively. It is discovered, tested, and used in practical situation. It shows how things are done and how educational results are achieved. So, this is a learning of principles, manggawas ng mga laws, mga formulas, mga associations, kanang atong magipang tuuhan nato, mga hypotheses, muna siya, diri mo sulod sa learning of principles. Ang ginatudlo sa mga subjects like sa science, sa mathematics, na mga formulas, na mga hypotheses, na mga laws, di na siya learning of principles. And it is important because it shows how things are done and how educational results are achieved. Next is problem solving. Problem solving is a higher order thinking process. This learning requires the use of cognitive abilities such as thinking, reasoning, observation, imagination, and generalization. So, in problem solving, in problem solving, the best example for problem solving is kanang mga group activities sa eskwelahan. So the students were able to build confidence and they learn to look at challenges from a fresh perspective. So they develop greater situational and social awareness. So this is a problem solving, hatagag chance ang mga estudyante para ma-develop nila ilang mga skills and to reflect on their own work and generate ideas. Importante ang problem solving para ma-practice ang una-una sa bata para makabalo siya mo reason out, makabalo siya mo observe, mo think in a critical way, and tisut maning manok oy. Makabalo dagan siya ma-develop nga mga skills niya. That is problem solving. For example, ani mga group activities, mga individual activities, or mga tasks nga gihatag sa mga teachers sa school. For example, reporting, kaning reporting. No, gitagaan mi chance nga para ma-express namo ang mga thoughts and ma-enhance namo ang ability in reporting, in socializing, mga inana. And the last one is attitude learning. So attitude learning is a predisposition which determines and predicts behavior. So diri sa attitude learning, from the word attitude, ato ang mga kinaiya. It is self-initiated, voluntary attitude, stemming from natural curiosity. So kaning attitude learning, kabalo na gud mo ana kay kitang tanan kabalo na beta na sa attitude nato, di ba? Pagtuluan tag saktong pamatasan, so ato gyud na siyang ma-show sa ubang tawo. Kung tuluan tag dili maayong pamatasan, din mo po nato ang mapakita sa atong isikatawo. So importante nga ang kaning mga learned attitudes, it can influence our behavior toward people, objects, things, or ideas. So, muna siyang dapat atuang attitude, kana bang, you know, so, mo to siya ang attitude learning. And diri na tama na ko ang inog discuss. Do you have any questions? Clarifications? Nasabtan na tanan?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Very clear.
So you don't have any questions. I will give the floor to the next reporter, Ma'am L.
Okay, by the way, is it understood what is said to be learning?
It is understood.
Based on the definitions given to you just a while ago, take note that learning is said to be a change in behavior of the learner, may it be intentional, consciously, or unconsciously.
mo ka sa slide.
So, meaning to say, if you were able to acquire knowledge, you were able to learn. No? Based on the explanation given to you by Annalisa, it is said to be an internal processes within a person. And it is said to be based on the attitude if ever you wanted to learn. Because if you have a negative attitude towards learning, definitely you will never learn. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
That's why, of all the types of learning, attitude learning is said to be one of the most important things because even if you are said to be considered the brightest person, and if your students are not listening, and if your students don't have really the right attitude towards learning, all of those things that you are exerting are said to be futile.
Problem-based learning.
Diba?
Problem-based learning.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Attitude plays an important role in learning. That's why it is said to be one of the most important types of learning. Kaya naman,
Ako ra to
if you have
gipahingayan
a
ay ragwa kay
negative
basig natay
attitude
kailangan
towards
i-search ba.
learning, definitely
Ako ra ni gipahingayan.
learning could not be possible.
Ni kayo.
Kaya you will just say, ay, murag yapon na siya. Ana, hindi na siya mao. Okay? So you have already a negative attitude towards that. And it is all understood, the types of learning, motor learning, meaning to say, you are making use of yours, some different senses of the body. No? Oh, just like Annalisa told you just a while ago, nga it is said to be motor coordination. A baby cannot immediately run without crawling. Please take note of that. So it all started with crawling and then finally to running. So meaning to say, you are exercising your motor skills in there, right?
Kay madugay niya si ma'am. Hindi na
Yes, ma'am.
Ano hindi naman?
Yes, ma'am.
It is well explained, man. It is well explained the different types of learning and at the same time the definitions of learning.
Tingnan niya.
So, are there any more questions regarding the two topics that we have discussed just a while ago?
Done, ma'am.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic.
Okay, in relation to our topic for this morning, I am going to continue the discussion. So, the nature of theories of learning. So, the nature of learning or the changes occurring within an individual is difficult to visualize or understand because it is an internal process. So, ang nature sa learning or ang kausbanon nga mo-occur sa usa ka tawo, lisod siya makita o lisod siya sabdon kay lagi it is an internal process, meaning di na to siya meaning na siya sa ato ang utok, na siya sa utok sa tawo. Hence, it is not easy to present or explain in concrete terms what this complex process is all about. Thus, there is a need to look at theories of learning to enable one to better conceptualize and operationalize what learning is all about, to be discussed later. So, learning is a very comprehensive and complex concept, meaning it consists of different and connected parts. So, it covers a wide range of activities which cannot be explained with a limited framework.
This may be the reason why there is available wide range of theories of learning, and one of it is the behaviorism, each propounding and focusing on a particular perspective or view to explain what learning is. So, a learning theory, it is an organized set of principles explaining how individuals acquire or obtain, retain or continue, and recall or bring knowledge. Learning theories try to explain how people learn and why they learn. So they also try to explain the phenomenon of learning. So iyang nature, conditions under the learning best occurs ug asa mas maayo maka-learn ang usa ka tawo. Asa mas ma-enhance ang iyang knowledge sa learning. So learning theories, I instead they are the explanations are however considered as tentative, meaning not fully developed. So be as it may, these statements are not the result of guesswork, dili tomo-tomo. Instead, they are well studied or seriously thought out, and in many cases, the result of scientific study. So bisan ga study siya sa kuan sa tawo, sa internal process sa tawo, learning sa tawo, dili siya pasabot nga gihimo-himo ra or ilara ni gibutang-butangan. It is well studied and a result of scientific study. These theories specially guide teachers to have a better understanding of how learning occurs and how learners learn. So the term learning may mean differently to different people and used differently by different theories. Ana gani sila, every individual is unique in their own way. So as theories of learning evolved over time, definitions of learning shifted from changes that occurs in mind or behavior of an individual to changes in participations in ongoing activities with other individuals to changes in person's identity within the group. So ang learning, gakausob pud siya. While gakausob ang time, while ga-evolve ang time, gakausob ang definition sa learning, based siya sa behavior sa usa ka tawo, while ga-participate siya in an activity, in an decision making, it's either na siya sa group or siya ra usa. So dili na to kalimtan tong famous quote nga, the beautiful thing about learning is nobody can take it away from you. Tinuod na siya, di ba? Bisan kinsa, bisan kinsa, walay tanan pwede nila makuha sa ato except sa ato ang nahibal-an, sa ato nakatunan. So learning is an active social process. It is an active because it requires an individual to think, discuss, challenge, and analyze information. So let's move on to defining learner-centered. Lately, there has been a strong advocacy that push for learner-centeredness in educational practice, especially in curriculum development and teaching methodology. So this means that policy, planning, and implementation of educational practice should have the learner as its focus. It is therefore expected that theories of learning and their applications should be learner-centered. Learner-centered is the perspective that focuses on the individual learners, ilang heredity, o asa ilang gigikanan, from family to generations, ilang experiences in life, ilang perspectives, ilang panglantaw, ilang opinions, ilang backgrounds, ilang past, ilang talents, ilang interests, ilang capacities, asa ila kaya hangtod asa ila kaya ug unsa ilang kaya, ilang needs, kinahanglan, with a focus on learning. So the best available knowledge about learning and how it occurs, and about teaching practices that are most effective in promoting the highest levels of motivations, learning, and achievement for all learners. For a better understanding of that term learner-centered, the following are learner-centered principles meant to provide a framework for developing and incorporating new strategies and design of teaching. So these are the main ideas of these principles. First is they pertain to the learner and the learning process. Next is they focus on psychological factors, primarily internal and under the control of the learner. Psychological factors, so meaning on dili ni siya mo kaano how we think, how we kaan mo niyang sa internal processes. So next is they deal with external or contextual factors. Age, gender, race or ethnicity, learning styles nga may interact sa internal factors nila. Ana gani di ba makabantay ta nga ug unsa magunahon na ang usa ka tawo diya na to makita sa iyang mga binuhatan. Next is they are seen as an organized set of principles. Take note, no principle to be viewed in isolation. Next is the principles are classified under cognitive, metacognitive, motivational, affective, developmental, social, and individual difference factors related to learning that is to be discussed by Miss Jailo later. But as what I said earlier, all of these are factual information and based on scientific study. Lastly, these principles apply not only to all learners but to everybody involved in the educational system. As for example, our teachers, administrators, parents, staff, and guidance counselor. In summary, learner-centered education helps the students develop skills that will better equip them for their professional careers. As for teachers, this approach is trained so they can apply the principles and provide their students a better learning experience. So that is for under my discussion. So any questions about the nature of theories of learning and defining learner-centered? If none, I'm going to give the floor to Miss Francisco Jailo.
Okay, before we move on, let me emphasize the word learner-centered. Before class, it is said to be subject matter centered. So meaning to say, even if the learners were not able to get all of those things, the teacher before class is after of the subject matter. Meaning to say, what is said to be found in the book, page by page and cover to cover will be covered under the discussion because that is said to be subject matter centered. But now, it should be learner-centered. Why? Because we're after of the learner's acquisition of knowledge. Even if we will be finishing the entire book and the whole topic, if the learners were not able to understand what are said to be those topics, it's still useless. But if it is said to be a learner-centered approach class, the center of the educative process is said to be the learner. The center of the educative process is said to be the learner. So meaning to say, if the learner were not able to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge of that particular topic, if you are said to be the teacher, whether you like it or not, you are going to reteach the subject or the topic. Do you know what's the difference between a subject matter centered and at the same time a learner-centered approach?
Subject matter, mag-focus siya sa subject, pero ang learner-centered, mag-focus siya sa learning.
Based from my explanation given, if it is said to be a learner-centered approach class, the center of the learning process is said to be the learner. If it is said to be a subject matter approach class, the center of the learning process is said to be the subject. So which do you prefer? It is said to be a subject matter centered or a learner-centered approach?
Learner-centered approach.
Okay, it should be a learner-centered approach class because no matter how you discuss the lesson very well, but if your students or learners were not able to get it, it's still useless and you were not able to transfer learning at all. So take note, and do not compare yourselves if you will become a teacher. Do not tell your students or your learners that why is it that you are not able to get it? When in fact that particular topic is said to be very simple.
Kasabaan.
Take note of the individual differences that we have. And stop comparing. And stop comparing each learner class because each learner is said to be a unique individual.
Discuss siya ba nga, di makasabot ang
Is it
bata. Hindi
understood?
makasabaan pag ma-teacher na ta.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Because there's I joke.
Focus on the learners rather than on the topics or the subject matter. Okay?
Okay na?
Hmm?
Ano sa'yo niya?
Is it understood?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Let's move on.
Hindi na. Meron ko na slide. Oh, hindi na. Ako na siya. Oh. Thank you, Teacher L. Okay, classmates, are you still there?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good to hear. I will be the last reporter, so bear with me and listen carefully. So, let's proceed. There are 14 learner-centered psychology principles that are divided into those referring to cognitive and metacognitive, motivational and affective, developmental and social, and individual differences factors. So first is the cognitive and metacognitive factors. So what are these? Cognitive and metacognitive factors are both processing and building abilities within the learner. When we say cognitive, it deals with mental processes such as memory, learning, problem solving, attention, and decision making. However, the metacognitive deals with an individual's higher order cognitive processes, mas sobra pa sila sa cognitive, where a person has active control over their cognition. Kanang utak siya sa katawhan that's actively responding in any situation and also immediately presenting their own thoughts and ideas. So let's proceed to the following part of cognitive and metacognitive factors. First is the nature of the learning process. Learning of complex subject matter is most effective when it is an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experience. When we say intentional process, mo ni siya ang sinadya, gutuyo, or scripted, which is lesson plan. Every subject is gunamitan og lesson plan. Inside the lesson plan facilitates a lot of activities. From that thing, it will have an effective learning process para sa mga bata. Number 2. Goals of the learning process. These are the goals of the learning process. First is the successful learner. Usually, siya sa mga goals sa learning process ang makakatun ang usa ka bata. And when support and guidance can create meaningful, mo na mga teachers or any guidance na mo assist sa mga bata in creating meaningful learning goals and gathering knowledge meaningfully para sa mga bata. Number 3. Construction of knowledge. The learner can relate new information in meaningful ways. This is how we construct our mode of teaching and rely information. For example, dahil mga bata na kukukinahanglan o catch up or attention para nato. So what we are going to do as teachers, we must to create creative strategies para ma-catch up nila attention, and most importantly, they will be interested in the topic and eventually para makasabot sila sa tuwa. Next, strategic thinking. The learner can recreate and use a repertoire of thinking and reasoning strategies to achieve complex goals. They will adapt reasoning strategies wherein they will be able to overcome the complex goals. Paano makaya niya madaog or malampasan ang ilang mga gustong mabalaan and more difficulties? Number 5, thinking about thinking. Higher order strategies for selecting and monitoring mental operations facilitate creative and critical thinking. Muna ang mga strategies sa usa ka bata na pang higher level of strategy for mental operations nila, as well as nga maka-advantage sa ilahan like having a creative mindset and improves critical thinking. So let's proceed also to the following part of motivational and affection factors. Number 7, motivational and emotional influences in learning. Motivation is quite very essential factor para sa mga bata. Once motivated ang bata, it would be possible na makakatun sila and makadiscover sa sila kawaliyon interest, beliefs, skills, and more. Number 8, intrinsic motivation to learn. It is important sa usa ka bata na nature niya that being motivated to learn, to acquire new knowledge. Okay? Number 9. Effects of motivation on effort. Mao na epekto sa usa ka bata once motivated siya at the same time na siya effort para makakaton. So, from that thing, makakuha sila og complex knowledge and skills. Kung wala motivation ng usa ka bata, hindi siya makakaton unless og ukson. Okay. Next slide. Next, developmental and social factors. Number 10, developmental influences on learning. As individuals develop, they encounter different opportunities and experiences, as well as constraints for learning. Learning is most effective when differential within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is taken into account. Like for example, in across physical, the learner knows how to maintain physical fitness, and that's the thing that he or she develops from learning, and different factors that lives either in any social media platforms or in our environmental observations. Number 11, social influences on learning. Learning is influenced by social interactions, interpersonal relations, and communication with others. It's clearly said that we are able as well to learn from social interaction as well as doing communication. Payanit na ugubuhat karon. And last is the individual differences factors. Number 12. Individual differences in learning. Learners have different strategies, approaches, and capabilities for learning that are a function of prior experience and heredity. So, nakuha yung mga bata nga lalahi o kamaagong and strategies in learning process doon sa ilang mga individual differences. For example, naging bata nga makalearn lang sila paghilong and peaceful para makafocus siya. So, inahapon na doon kay mo ako na yung heredity niya. Number 13. Learning and diversity. Learning is most effective when differences in learners' linguistic, social, and cultural backgrounds are taken into account. It is clearly said that learning is most effective when the learners have a differences, because students gain a more comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, while the teacher first recognizing and respecting individual differences. Okay, last. 14. Standards and assessment. This is what we have to do and make an assessment and standards for our learners, to challenge them if they truly understand and gain some learnings to the lesson we taught for them. Okay. more na ako report. So, anybody have a question, clarification, or nasap na ba ang tanan? Uy, ikaw!
Are you done? Miss Lou?
Yes, ma'am, I'm done.
Okay. So, under cognitive and metacognitive factors, we have
Ako ba?
six. Nature of the learning process, goals of the learning process, construction of knowledge, strategic thinking, thinking about thinking, and context of learning. So, meaning to say, it is about on your
Okay lang ako. Doon man ako.
cognitive factors, meaning to say,
It's
all about
okay, I will
those things that should be developed in your brain. Di ba? Cognitive factors, so that is said to be development of your brain, right?
Dali ako na ko.
Hmm? So those are the six factors, such as nature of the learning process. What is the nature of the learning process? It can be an intentional process of constructing meaning from information and experiences. So you will be able to construct new knowledge based on your experiences. What is said to be the goal of the learning process? The goal of the learning process is all the students should be able to gain knowledge out of it. New knowledge out of it. No? Construction of knowledge. Are your students were able to construct knowledge if they develop their cognitive aspects, which is said to be the development of their intellect? Strategic thinking. These are said to be the different strategies that are involved so that a certain process will be meaningful and effective. And then context of learning. Learning is influenced by environmental factors. Yes, it's true, no? Do not limit yourself that you only learn from the four walls of the certain classroom. You can still acquire knowledge outside of the four walls of the same classroom through technology, no? Through the instructional processes or practices being employed by the teacher. You can also learn something from the culture of other persons. So those are said to be development of your cognitive aspect. When you say motivational and affective factors class, we have three. Motivational and emotional influences to learning. Intrinsic motivation to learn and effects of motivation. So meaning to say, if you are not motivated to learn, you will never learn. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Because intrinsic motivation is said to be internal factors. Meaning to say, nobody urges you to learn, but you yourself willingly to learn. But if it is said to be, because there are said to be two factors of motivation, the intrinsic factor and at the same time the extrinsic factors. When you say internally, intrinsically, meaning to say you are motivated by yourself, nobody influence you to motivate. But instead, you yourself, it is said to be your internal urges to learn. But if it is said to be external class, meaning to say, most likely you're after the reward. You strive more because you're after the reward, and the award's given to you by some person or by somebody. So it is also a combination of intrinsic and at the same time extrinsic factors class. Guys, sometimes you are also motivated to learn if there are said to be rewards, no? If you're said to be penalized class, you urge yourself to learn. That's why corporal punishment class is no longer applied inside the classroom because it's not good. You let a certain learner learn by themselves rather than imposing too much discipline on them so that they will be able to learn. Anyway, if you are really motivated to learn, you can learn it. Okay. And then effects of motivation on effort. So meaning to say, if it is said to be, if the teacher guided you very well, there's a tendency that learning is said to be meaningful and effective on the part of the learners and the teachers as well. But it is not, there's a tendency na learning could never be more, or learning could never be acquired. Right? So for developmental and social factors class, you have developmental influences on learning and at the same time social influences on learning. Developmental means it is on the part of the learner class. No? So it contains the social domains, the physical, intellectual, and emotional, because it is said to be on a developmental stage. Huh? Learning is most effective when differential within and across physical, intellectual, emotional, and social domains is taken into account. So all of these things should be taken into account so that teaching could be possible. While social influences on learning is all about your relationship with other persons and at the same time how you communicate with them so that there will be a smooth sailing relationship between persons. Because since you are said to be a social being class, you have the right to be sociable. And finally, individual differences factors. We should consider individual differences class because every person is said to be a unique person. And do not keep on comparing because you are said to be unique. And learning approaches and capabilities for learning that are a function of prior experiences and heredity. Sometimes you will be able to learn because of the prior experience that you have. If you have a prior experience on a certain thing, you will be able to relate it, and learning could be very much possible. We should also consider the variety of learners that we have. We have diverse learners class, so meaning to say, lain-lain ang classes atong mga learners. So you must have to consider that. If you are set to be a teacher, you must have to understand learning diversity and standards and assessment. So all of these things will be possible, and you will be able to measure whether they understand or not if there is said to be an assessment that will that will be taking place in every time. Question so far.
Ma'am, good morning. Nara, good morning, ma'am. Nara ko'y question. Ano mong siya kaning it's always kanang remind sa ako amang ba kanang sa ano na po siya sa part na po siya sa learning is can emotional experience ma'am can affect also ma'am no kanang like based lang po sa ako experience is kanang ga-strive ko kanang naningkamot ko nga maka-learn something like sa ako ang daily experience diri sa ako ang community kanang makaingon ko ba nga it's really emotional feeling can affect the way nga kanang maka-learn ko sa mga butang and karon lang nako siya na sabtan nga while ga-learn ko sa lesson karon. That's all. Thank you.
Emotional factors plays an important role also towards learning, because if your mind is said to be disturbed, class, definitely learning is not so possible.
Yes, ma'am.
Especially if you're emotionally bothered by something, so there's a tendency you will also never learn. Let's say, for example, you're coming from a breakup just a while ago or just a few days, so definitely you cannot really think it properly because you are emotionally bothered, right? Do you agree with me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Cite an example where you are emotionally bothered.
Ano ma'am, kaning like family issues, kaning sa diri ra pod sa ano ma'am, family problems like that ma'am.
So it affects learning class.
Sa chat ni diri ba?
If you're having a problem, no, a family problem, so definitely you are disturbed, no? And sometimes class you cannot think it properly because of the problems that you have. So better solve that problem so that you will be able to really focus on the things that you wanted to learn.
Annalisa here.
Yes?
Last part of our discussion.
Excuse me,
No
ma'am.
question. Yes, Miss Francisco.
Na kami last part, ma'am. Wala kami nahuman.
Kapali ay?
Yes, ma'am.
Oo.
Okay.
It's all about.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I will give the floor to the next reporter, Annalisa.
So,
So it's
Suntrock,
all about the different theories of learning, Annalisa.
ma'am,
It's all about the different theories of learning,
Kaning-
such as behaviorism.
no, ma'am. Kaning, sa last part siya sa mong topic, ma'am. Kaning problem-based learning, essential questions, o discovery learning. Tulo na kabuk, ma'am.
Okay.
Last part na lang siya, ma'am. So, Suntrock identifies some learner-centered instructional strategies which address learners' needs. They are problem-based learning. So, this strategy emphasizes real-life problem solving. It exposes learners to authentic life problems that they meet in their daily lives. This approach involves small group efforts to identify problems and issues they wish to tackle and explore, then identify materials and resources to solve the problem. So the teacher guides and monitors the learner's problem-solving efforts. So problem-based learning, like for example ganina katong mga group activities, mga activities or mga tasks nga gihatag sa teacher. This strategy is very important because it helps students learn what is relevant to the real world, and it provides opportunities for students to collaborate and practice their communication and social skills. It also encourages higher order critical thinking and de-emphasize memorization. So, moro to siya. Next one is Ma'am Jailo for the essential questions.
So, under problem-based learning class, it involves small groups efforts to identify problems and issues they wish to tackle and explore. No? So, there is said to be a problem there that you are going to solve. But of course, with the guidance and the teacher also monitors the learner's problem-solving efforts. That's why, class, if a teacher gives you a certain problem, he will assist you on how to solve the problem the moment that you cannot really solve it. Example, there is said to be a problem-solving in math. And if you cannot really answer and if you cannot really solve it, it will be the teacher that will do the answering. Right? Have you experienced that?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So teacher plays an important role in problem-based learning because if ever the learners were not able to solve it, teacher should be on the rescue. Maybe he will just guide you towards solving that particular problem. Next.
Okay? The second is essential questions. Next slide. Ask of learners which perplex them, followed by other questions which motivate the students to explore the questions and look for answers. The questions cause the students to think and provoke their curiosity. Over here, it talks about asking our learners to challenge and examine them. If they are able to answer our question as well as if they truly understand and what learned from the topics. And these questions promote conceptual thinking. So, mauni ang mga question na pampapukaw sa mga bata. Mga question na makalauna sila ug maka sila maka-identify sa answer ani. For example, is life always balanced? Is fair always equal? Is equal always
Meaning to
fair?
say, it's important, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do not ask questions if you know answer it immediately, but instead you are ask questions which develop their critical thinking. No? So questions such as higher order thinking skills should be emphasized. The why and the hows rather than the what and when. No? So by asking why questions, class, you are developing their reasoning power, right? And also by asking the how question, you are also wanted to develop their reasoning ability rather than what is your name, what is the description, low level kind of questioning. So we're going to ask questions that are said to be higher thinking order skill. Moto siya ang akong ingon.
Okay, lastly,
Yes.
sorry.
Sige. Let's move on to the last.
Okay, so the lastly is the discovery learning. This approach is in contrast to direct instruction approach. Teachers create the situation where students explore and figure out things for themselves. They guided discovery learning evolved from discovery learning where students still construct their own understanding but with the guidance of the teacher. So okay, ma'am. So, for that words, discovery learning, it is in terms which students discover ideas and knowledge via exploration, projects, and play. That would be all,
From
ma'am.
the word discover,
Yes.
you will be doing it by yourself. But of course, with the guidance of the teacher as well. Experimental method is also under this discovery learning. The guided discovery learning involves from discovering learning where students still construct their own understanding but with the guidance of the teacher. Teachers create situations where students explore and figure out things for themselves. So meaning to say, the teacher there will just give something for them to think it over. And then the students will be the one to discover them by themselves. That is said to be under discovery learning. Do not spoon feed your students in their critical thinking. But instead, okay,
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. And that would be all. Okay.
And that would be all.
Thank you.
Hinay ang wifi. Sebentar.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
That's all for our...
and are all the topics been understood?
Hindi ang connection.
Huh?
Ay, pasinabog ka.
Yes, no. We will be entertaining questions.
Lagay na yun ang connection. My goodness, Marga.
Which part of the topics you really do not understand? Or it's not clear to you? Okay.
Okay ra nakasagot sa tanan. Kaya wala kang nakabay.
Okay. We'll be entertaining questions.
Kaya ano kalaan.
Before, we will be going to take a theories of learning. Who is it to be assigned for this, Annalisa?
Sasa.
Sa sunod sila na ikaw.
Sa next reporter, ma'am. Hello?
Hello. It's all about behaviorism, cognitism or cognitive constructivism, social constructivism, social learning theory, social constructivism, and then experiential learning, multiple intelligences, situated learning theory, and finally, 21st century learning skills.
Ma'am,
Ah.
Ilaha, ma'am Oliveria.
Ha?
kami ang next reporter, ma'am, and you assigned us to report only the 5 theories, ma'am, which is the behaviorism, the cognitive constructivism, social constructivism, and social theory learning, and social constructivism. So it's only 5, ma'am. Theories.
It's included in the report about experiential learning.
Ilaha, isuduro na
Try
tayo.
to include multiple intelligence tests. Anyway, it's found in the module situated learning theory and then 21st century skills. Huh?
Okay, ma'am.
Ay, apil sa ilaha.
It's found in the module anyway.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Business. 21st century skills. Yes? Question?
Good morning, ma'am. Ma'am, naaman kay gi-assign nga lain reporter sa kanang katong last nga imo gi-mention, ma'am?
Okay. There are also assigned persons for that to do
Yes,
it.
ma'am. Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Sa 21st, ma'am, may ala ka gi-assign. And then sa amon to sa theories of learning, ma'am.
Okay, so no problem. Huh? It will just be reported next meeting.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so far, are there any more questions? Hmm?
Nana.
Hello.
None, ma'am.
Understood the topics that we have discussed just a while ago about the types of learning, what is learning, the nature of learning, individual differences, cognitive, motivational, developments, and social factors, and then the last 3, learner-centered instructional strategies, problem-based learning, essential questions, and at the same time, discovery learning. Before we leave.
Nana. Nana.
Okay? Annalisa, please don't fail and forget to do what I instructed you to do, ha?
Okay, ma'am, noted.
Okay. So much for this. So let's call it a day because it's almost time,
Yes.
right?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, classmates, for listening.
Hmm?
Okay.
Yes,
Ayun,
yes ma'am.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, classmates,
Thank you,
for
ma'am. God
listening.
bless. Thank you, ma'am.
Guys,
God bless.
share screen.
Thank you, ma'am.